She worked in a small, cozy diner tucked away in the corner of a busy street. Every morning she greeted the regular customers with a warm smile and a simple, "Good morning." Her job wasn't glamorous. In fact, it was quite ordinary. She'd carry trays, take orders, and serve meals to people who often didn't notice her beyond the food she brought to their tables. Most of the customers were in a hurry, barely acknowledging her presence as they went about their busy lives. Day after day, she served plates of pancakes, burgers, and coffee, sometimes chatting with the regulars, but mostly keeping to herself. She had dreams, big ones, dreams that went far beyond the confines of the diner, but every time she thought about reaching for them, doubts crept in. She wasn't special. Just another face in the crowd, another waitress serving customers and waiting for something more that never seemed to come. The diner wasn't much to look at either. Its walls were decorated with old photographs, and the smell of fried food hung in the air. The clink of cutlery, the hum of the coffee machine, and the chatter of the customers formed the soundtrack of her life. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and nothing ever seemed to change. But even in this mundane routine, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more she was meant to do, something that would make her stand out in a way that wasn't just about serving food. She often looked at the customers who came in, sitting there, enjoying their meals, while her own thoughts took her somewhere else, somewhere better. She loved to watch the musicians who sometimes passed through town, their voices and songs filling the air with energy. She would imagine herself up on stage, holding a microphone, singing her heart out to a crowd. But those thoughts were quickly dismissed. Who would ever take her seriously? She was just a waitress after all, a person who worked in the background while the world moved on without noticing. Her co-workers didn't understand either. They had their own lives, their own plans, and their own dreams, dreams that were grounded in reality. They would laugh and joke with her, but they didn't see her the way she saw herself. They didn't know the longing in her heart, the desire to do something that wasn't tied to a shift, a uniform, or the smell of greasy fries. She told herself it was silly to even think about it. She had responsibilities, bills to pay, and a job that, while predictable, kept her going. She had grown comfortable in the routine, even though something inside her yearned for more. But how could she break out of this small world she had built for herself? How could she take that leap into something unknown when she wasn't even sure if anyone would believe in her? It was during one of those quiet, almost lonely moments after a long shift that she found herself standing by the counter, wiping down the same spot for the 100th time. The diner was nearly empty now. Only a few people lingered, finishing their meals. As she stared out the window, watching the traffic go by, she made a promise to herself. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting and start doing something about those dreams she'd been pushing aside for so long. She didn't know how or when it would happen, but she was determined to figure it out. After all, she couldn't stay in this small world forever. There had to be something bigger waiting for her outside, something that would prove to herself that she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was capable of more. And so, little did she know, that very night, her journey towards something extraordinary was about to begin. One evening, after a long shift, she was wiping down the counters, trying to keep herself busy, as she usually did when there was nothing else to do. The diner had mostly emptied out, and the sound of clinking dishes was starting to fade. The usual routine had begun to feel like a blur, the kind of job where time passed without her really noticing. But this time, instead of focusing on the task in front of her, her mind wandered. She thought about her dreams, about being more than just a waitress. She thought about singing. That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets, she passed a little TV shop with a display in the window showing a talent competition. She stopped, curiosity getting the best of her. The show was loud and lively, filled with hopeful contestants showing off their talents, from dancers to singers. She stood there for a while, watching in awe. Some of the performers were nervous, others confident, but all of them had one thing in common. They were chasing their dreams. It wasn't the first time she had thought about singing. Over the years, she had often found herself humming tunes while working or catching herself singing softly while doing the dishes at home. But she had never shared it with anyone. Not a single person knew how much she loved music. She didn't think she was good enough to even consider it. Besides, what were the chances that someone like her, just a waitress with no experience, could ever make it? As she walked back to her apartment, the thought kept nagging at her. Could she really do it? Could she take that small, terrifying step and actually sing in front of people? She felt like something inside her was waking up, a spark she hadn't felt in years. It was a thought that had been buried for so long, hidden behind the walls of doubt and fear. But now it was there, standing strong, pushing her to act on it. When she got home, she sat down at the small kitchen table. The room was quiet, and the glow of the streetlights outside flickered through the window. She thought about the talent shows she had seen. Those people on TV weren't so different from her, were they? They had fears and doubts, just like she did. But they had still gone up on that stage. They had taken a chance, and some of them had changed their lives forever. Her heart raced as she considered the possibility. She had nothing to lose, after all. She could stay in her little world, stuck in the same routine. Or she could try something new, something that terrified her but also excited her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't let fear hold her back anymore. She had been waiting for the right moment her whole life. But what if that moment was now? The next morning, she found herself sitting in front of her phone, scrolling through social media, looking up local auditions. There it was, an open call for a singing competition. It was happening in a few days and anyone could sign up. It wasn't a big national show, but it was a start. She felt a rush of excitement. Could this really be the chance she had been waiting for? Her hands trembled as she typed in her information and submitted her name. She didn't even tell anyone she was doing it. She didn't need their doubt or their laughter. This was for her. And in that moment, she knew she had taken the first step. The fear was still there, but so was something else, a sense of hope, a belief that maybe she was meant for something more than serving coffee and filling orders. Maybe she was meant to be on that stage. Maybe, just maybe, she could be the one who amazed everyone. The day of the audition arrived, and she could hardly believe it. It was like something out of a dream. She had spent the entire morning pacing around her small apartment, her nerves getting the best of her. Her heart was racing, her palms were sweaty, and she couldn't stop wondering if she was making a huge mistake. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she froze on stage? Or worse, what if they all laughed at her? But then, just as quickly, as the doubts appeared, she shook them off. She had made it this far, and there was no turning back now. The thought of standing on that stage, singing in front of people, seemed overwhelming, but she had to do it. She couldn't keep letting fear rule her life. This was her chance to see if she could really do it. She put on her favorite shirt, the one that made her feel a little braver, and took a deep breath. As she walked out the door and into the street, the familiar sounds of the city felt different. Today, the world seemed a little bigger, a little more exciting. She was no longer just walking to her usual job at the diner. She was heading towards something that could change her life. When she arrived at the audition venue, her stomach twisted into knots. The place was filled with people, some sitting quietly, some practicing their lines or vocal warm-ups. Everyone seemed to be in their own world, focused and prepared, and that made her feel even more out of place. She tried to blend in, sitting quietly in the corner, pretending she wasn't about to do something completely outside of her comfort zone. As the time passed, her nerves only grew. She could hear people singing in the next room, their voices echoing down the hall. Each one sounded better than the last, and with every note, her anxiety climbed higher. What if her voice wasn't good enough? What if they told her to leave before she even had a chance to sing? The negative thoughts kept rushing in, and it felt like they were drowning out the little voice inside her that was trying to stay hopeful. Finally, her name was called. Her heart skipped a beat, and she stood up, feeling lightheaded. She walked toward the stage, each step heavy with doubt. The judges sat at a long table, their eyes on her as she stepped into the spotlight. She could feel the weight of their gaze, and for a moment she almost turned back. But then she remembered why she was there. She remembered the feeling she had when she watched that talent show, when she told herself she couldn't keep waiting for the perfect moment. This was the moment. She took a deep breath and grabbed the microphone. The first note she sang was shaky, and for a split second she thought about stopping. But then something surprising happened. The more she sang, the more comfortable she became. Her voice, which she had always kept hidden, started to flow. She found herself getting lost in the music, forgetting about the judges, the people watching, and the fear that had been holding her back for so long. It was just her and the song. As she finished, there was a brief silence. She held her breath, waiting for their reaction. The judges exchanged glances, and for a moment, she thought maybe she had blown it. But then one of them smiled and nodded. Another judge asked her to sing another song. It was all she needed to hear. She couldn't believe it. She had done it. She had stepped out of her comfort zone and made it through the audition. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else: excitement, hope, and a sense of pride. She had faced her fears, and even though it wasn't perfect, she had made it. And that was enough to show her that maybe, just maybe, she was on the right path. When she left the audition, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. She had done something she never thought she would do, and it felt like a victory. It wasn't the end of her journey, but it was a huge step forward, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she really was capable of more than just being a waitress. A few days passed after the audition, and she tried to return to her usual routine, but something had changed inside her. The nerves and the self-doubt that had once controlled her every move were slowly being replaced by a quiet sense of confidence. She had done something she never thought possible, and that made her feel different. It felt like a door had opened, and now she couldn't go back to the way things were before. Then, one evening, she received an unexpected call. She was sitting at her usual booth in the diner, sipping on a cup of coffee during a slow shift when her phone rang. It was the talent competition organizers. Her heart raced as she picked up the phone, not sure what to expect. The voice on the other end was warm and friendly. "We loved your performance," the person said. "We'd like to invite you to the next round. You've made it through." For a moment, she couldn't believe it. It was as if the world had stopped spinning. She had made it. She had actually made it through to the next round of the competition. Her mind raced with a mix of excitement and fear. She hadn't been expecting this. It felt like a dream, one she might wake up from at any moment. But this wasn't a dream. It was real. The reality of what she had just accomplished began to sink in. The familiar sounds of the diner, the clinking of silverware, the hum of conversation, felt distant now. It was as though she was in a new world, one that felt far bigger than the small diner she had spent so many years working in. The next few days were a blur. She practiced every free moment she had, pushing herself to become better. She was nervous, of course, but she was also driven. She had a new fire inside her, a determination to prove to herself and to everyone else that she was more than just a waitress. She was capable of so much more. Her friends and co-workers, who had once been skeptical of her dream, started to notice the change in her. They could see it in her eyes, the excitement, the focus, the belief in herself. They had watched her struggle with doubt for so long, but now they could see the spark she had always hidden. Some of them were surprised, others were impressed, and a few even began to believe in her more than they had before. The thought of performing again, in front of even more people, filled her with both fear and excitement, but this time, it was different. She wasn't just stepping onto a stage as a nervous contestant. She was stepping onto it with purpose. She wasn't there to prove anything to anyone except herself. When the day of the next round finally arrived, she could hardly sit still. The competition was bigger, with more contestants, more judges, and more pressure. But as she stood backstage, waiting for her turn, she realized that she wasn't as afraid as she thought she would be. The nerves were still there, but they felt different now, almost like a rush of energy. She had faced so much already, and this was just another step in her journey. When it was her turn to perform, she walked onto the stage with a new sense of strength. The bright lights, the rows of faces in the crowd. It was all overwhelming, but she didn't let it stop her. She took a deep breath, grabbed the microphone, and let the music flow through her. This time, she wasn't just singing for the judges, she was singing for herself. The moment she finished, there was a long pause. Her heart pounded in her chest. But then, the audience erupted in applause. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough to make her feel like she had finally found her place. The judges nodded with approval, and for the first time, she truly felt like she belonged there. She didn't win that round, but it didn't matter. She had already won in her own way. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, faced her fears, and done something that most people would never even consider trying. She had proven to herself that she was capable of more than she ever imagined. That night, as she walked home under the stars, she felt a deep sense of pride. She was no longer just the waitress who served food and refilled drinks. She was someone who had the courage to chase her dreams, even when it seemed impossible. And that was a victory all on its own. The next few months brought a whirlwind of change. The competition may not have led to immediate fame, but it opened doors she never imagined. She was invited to more auditions, some small and some larger, and while not every opportunity worked out, each one was a stepping stone in her journey. The calls from producers, the interviews, and even the rehearsals, everything felt both surreal and exhilarating. She began to believe that maybe this was her new reality. But with each step forward, the pressure also increased. At first, the excitement of the opportunities masked the challenges. But as time passed, the weight of being constantly in the spotlight began to feel heavier. The world was watching, and the expectations were high. She had to keep proving herself, and sometimes the doubt crept back in. Was she really cut out for this? Could she continue to rise? There were days when she would get lost in her thoughts, questioning everything. She would look in the mirror and wonder if she was truly the same person who had walked into that first audition with trembling hands. The fear she had faced, the uncertainty, it seemed so far behind her now. But as the demands of her new career took hold, it was easy to forget why she had started in the first place. She wasn't just here for the fame or the applause. She was here because she loved music, because she had a voice that needed to be heard. The pressure mounted with every new performance. There were long rehearsals, hours of perfecting songs, and the constant push to outdo herself with every appearance. It wasn't just about singing anymore. It was about living up to expectations, dealing with criticism, and making sure every note was flawless. The fun she once felt began to feel like a distant memory. The love for singing, the joy that had once come so naturally, now seemed buried beneath the weight of perfection. One day, after a particularly grueling rehearsal, she sat in her dressing room, exhausted and overwhelmed. Her reflection in the mirror seemed like a stranger. She had worked so hard to reach this point, but the endless pressure was wearing her down. She had become so focused on pleasing everyone else, so concerned with what the world expected from her, that she had lost sight of why she started this journey in the first place. Sitting in the quiet of the room, she allowed herself to finally feel the weight of it all. But in that moment of exhaustion, something clicked. She remembered her first performance, the nervousness, the excitement, the way she felt truly alive when she was on that stage, singing from the heart. It wasn't about perfection or pleasing the crowd. It was about connecting with the music and sharing that connection with others. She had gotten so caught up in the world of expectations and demands that she had forgotten the core of why she started. She realized then that she needed to get back to her roots. She needed to remember why she loved music in the first place. It wasn't about impressing the judges or pleasing the fans. It was about feeling the music deep inside her and letting that energy flow. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be real. That night, after the rehearsal, she took some time for herself. She listened to her favorite songs, the ones that had first sparked her love for music. She sang along, not worrying about hitting every note perfectly, but simply enjoying the sound of her voice. It felt freeing. She had spent so much time trying to live up to others' expectations that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to sing for herself. The next time she stepped onto the stage, she was different. She wasn't weighed down by the need for perfection. She wasn't focused on the judgment of others. She simply let the music carry her, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like magic again. The crowd may have been watching, the judges may have been listening, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the music, the connection, and the joy she felt when she let go. She didn't win every competition, and not every performance was perfect. But she no longer needed that. What she had rediscovered was the joy of singing, the love for music that had first inspired her. And that, she realized, was all she needed to keep moving forward. As time went on, her life began to change in ways she hadn't imagined. She had gone from being the shy, nervous person who only dreamed of singing to someone who was now standing on bigger stages and singing in front of audiences who admired her talent. The journey had been full of highs and lows, but now she felt like she was finally finding her place in the world. Her social media followers started growing, and soon people began recognizing her when she went out. At first, it was strange. She wasn't used to the attention, but it was a part of the new life she had stepped into. She found herself talking to fans after shows, signing autographs, and even doing interviews. It felt like a dream, but it was also overwhelming at times. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a performer, an artist, someone people looked up to. But with that new life came new pressures. It was no longer just about getting on stage and singing. It was about building a career, managing expectations, and staying relevant. She was invited to larger events, had more opportunities to collaborate with other artists, and was even approached by record labels. The offers seemed endless, but the pressure to succeed was real. She felt the weight of it every day, and there were times when it felt like too much. Despite all the excitement, she sometimes found herself feeling lonely. The more her career grew, the more she found it hard to connect with old friends and family in the same way. They couldn't quite understand the world she was now living in. They didn't know what it was like to stand in front of a crowd, hoping to impress, or to work long hours in the studio, struggling to create that perfect song. There were moments when she missed the simplicity of her old life, the quiet days at the diner when she didn't have to worry about the next performance or what people thought of her. She missed the calm, the normalcy. But at the same time, she knew that she had worked hard to get here. She couldn't give up on the opportunities that had come her way. She started to learn how to manage the pressure better. She took time to reflect on why she was doing this in the first place. Because of her love for music, because it made her feel alive. She had to remind herself not to lose sight of that joy in the midst of everything else. Singing wasn't just a job or a way to make money. It was her passion, her way of connecting with the world. She found balance by taking small breaks between her busy schedule, spending time with the people who had always supported her, and giving herself space to relax. It was a way of staying grounded, of remembering where she came from. Even with her busy new life, she needed to stay connected to who she was at the core. One of the most rewarding parts of her success was the opportunity to inspire others. People started reaching out to her, telling her how much her story meant to them. Some shared their own dreams of becoming singers, while others simply thanked her for showing them that it was okay to chase something bigger than themselves. She began to realize that her journey wasn't just about her. It was about showing others that dreams were possible, even if they seemed out of reach. She kept pushing forward, taking each challenge one step at a time. The road wasn't always smooth, and there were days when she felt exhausted, but every time she stepped on stage, she remembered the feeling that had started it all, the thrill of singing from the heart, of sharing her voice with the world. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She had proven to herself that no dream was too big, and that even a waitress with no connections could make it. She had taken a chance, faced her fears, and come out stronger on the other side. And now, she was living the life she once only dreamed of. Looking back on everything, she felt proud of how far she had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it, and she knew, deep down, that the best was yet to come. Years passed, and her life continued to evolve in ways she could hardly have imagined when she first stepped onto that stage, filled with nerves and doubt. The little diner, where she had once served coffee and meals to busy customers, now felt like a distant memory. She had grown into her new life, one where she was not only a successful singer, but an inspiration to many. People no longer saw her as the girl who worked behind the counter. They saw her as someone who had broken barriers, someone who had proven that dreams really could come true. One evening, she decided to return to that very diner. She hadn't been back in years, but something inside her told her it was time. She walked through the familiar door, and the smell of freshly cooked food instantly brought back memories. The place hadn't changed much. The same regulars sat in the same booths, chatting and sipping their drinks. It was like stepping back in time, to a simpler, quieter version of her life. But this time, she wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had achieved something incredible. The staff behind the counter didn't recognize her at first. To them, she was just another person who had walked into the diner, maybe a little out of place in her designer jacket and sunglasses. But she smiled at the waitress behind the counter and said, "I used to work here." The young woman's eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly realized who this person was. "Wait, are you?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. "Yes," she said, laughing softly. "I'm the same girl who used to serve you coffee every morning." The waitress's jaw dropped. "No way! You've made it so big. Everyone knows you now. You're a star." It was surreal to hear those words. Just a few years ago, she had been the one in the background, unnoticed by most people. Now she was standing in the same place, a symbol of perseverance and success. It was a full circle moment, a reminder of how far she had come. She sat down at one of the booths, just like she had so many times before, but this time the feeling was different. She wasn't waiting on others. She was the one being noticed. As she looked around, she saw the faces of the regulars who had once been part of her everyday routine. Some smiled at her, others nodded in recognition, but all of them seemed proud of what she had achieved. The waitress brought her a coffee, and they chatted for a few minutes about how things had changed. She shared stories about her journey, the struggles, the victories, and the lessons she had learned along the way. She talked about how, at one point, she had doubted herself so much that she almost gave up. But it was those moments of self-doubt that had pushed her to work even harder, to prove to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. The other customers in the diner began to notice the conversation, and soon enough, they were asking her for advice. How had she done it? What was the secret to achieving such success? She smiled, knowing that there was no easy answer. It wasn't about luck or talent alone. It was about hard work, perseverance, and believing in herself when no one else did. As she left the diner that evening, a sense of peace washed over her. She had come full circle, returning to where it all started, but this time as someone completely different. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who had made her dreams a reality. And as she walked down the street, looking at the city lights that had once seemed so far out of reach, she realized that anything was possible. Her journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, There was still so much more she wanted to achieve, more songs to sing, more stages to perform on. But no matter where her career took her, she would always remember where it all began. The diner, the small world she had once known, would always be a part of her. And in her heart, she knew that no matter how high she soared, she would never forget the humble beginnings that had shaped her into the person she had become. That night, as she looked up at the stars, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for every challenge, every doubt, every tear, and every triumph. She had grown stronger. She was no longer just the waitress who dreamed of something more. She was the woman who had fought for her dreams and won. And that, she realized, was the greatest achievement of all.